Is it running?
It is.
Okay.
All right, Brian, thanks again for coming back into the office today. So last time, what we talked about after kind of opening up the discussion, it looked like life insurance was a big need for you, and something that you wanted to address. And could you just catch me up again? Why was it personally important to you?
Yeah, well, I have a couple kids now. Want to make sure that if anything happens to me, that they're taken care of, and really just want to make sure that I leave behind more to my family than I had growing up. So
Awesome. So the first and most important thing that we have to do is figure out what's your number. What is the right amount of coverage for you? Then what we're going to do is try to figure out what's the right type of life insurance.
Okay.
So getting started, what we're going to do is do this. We're going to figure out your number. So there's two different ways we can go about that. The first is just rule of thumb. So we do 10 to 15 times income. The second way, which is what I think it will be the best for you, is to go through a needs analysis where we go line item by line item to kind of knock down and figure out what is the exact right coverage. Which would you prefer to do?
Well, I guess it makes more sense to actually find a number that's more suitable to me rather than just a cookie cutter response. So
Yeah, no, and I think that's the right way to look at it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start off by asking some simple questions for you, and then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to look back through it and make sure that we tackle everything. So the first part of the needs analysis is we got to make sure that we are replacing income if something were to happen to you or your spouse, so that they can still live the same quality of life. The second thing is we need to have capital replacements. So typically when someone passes away, there's big expenses that they want to make sure are gone. And then third, we're going to look at what do you already currently have in place to kind of tackle these needs. Does that all sound great?
Yeah.
Awesome. So for you today, what is your current income?
110,000.
110? Awesome. And what is your wife making these days currently?
She makes about 60.
60? Okay. And what was her name again?
Renee.
Renee. Okay. How long have y'all been together?
Well, let's see. I guess it's been about 8 years since we got married.
It is?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Were you guys dating for a long time before then?
No, things just were kind of right, so we moved along quickly, and so far it's panning out. Now we got a couple kids, so I guess we're stuck together.
Exactly. So the first question that I have for you, we want to tackle what is the family income goal. And what that means essentially is if one of you were to pass, how much do you want to make sure that the other is still making every single year? And so what we typically see is people land from anywhere from about 60% to 80% of their current income. How does that feel for you, those percentages?
I guess that feels pretty right. Is there any reason why they say somewhere between 60 and 80?
Yeah, so the big reason is bills don't stop coming in, especially electric, mortgage, such like that. And if one spouse passes, it typically doesn't alleviate a lot of the fixed costs that a lot of people have, just day to day, year to year, and especially raising two kids, as you said.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll shoot right in the middle and say 70%. Sounds good.
Okay. So 70%. So you guys are currently making $170,000 of income every year as a couple. 70% would be $119,000. How does that number feel to you?
That sounds about right. I think that would be a good amount for her to be able to live on if anything happened to me.
Perfect. And then, are you guys expecting to have any other types of income that the other one could receive in the event of one of you passing? So think of things such as Social Security in the future. Some people like to count that in there.
Oh no, I'm not expecting that we'll get any Social Security.
Yeah, rental income is another one people think of. Royalties, anything like that.
Nope, at least not that I'm aware of. So maybe one day.
Making it easy for me. Great. So Okay, so as we were talking about, we want to replace income in this section. The way that we look at it is we need to have a pool of money that we then can pull money out of every single year. And the way that we calculate that is looking at a percentage. So we think that safely, typically, we can pull 5% of the value of this fund every single year to help supplement this income that we're going to replace. How does the number 5% sound to you?
Well, I guess that would depend on how large the number is. You know, if the number's large enough for 5% gets the income needed, then sure.
Yeah, so this is just a multiplier. So we can adjust it up or down. If we expect that we can draw more than 5%, the number is going to be a little bit lower. Whereas if we want to be a little bit more conservative with how we're drawing money from this fund, the number is going to be a little bit higher for the amount of money that we need to replace this income.
Gotcha. Well, if y'all recommend 5%, that's fine.
Perfect. Great. So now that we figured out the income, next is the cash needs. So typically what we see today is that a funeral in DFW costs about 10 grand. That's just a pretty standard funeral costs. How does that number sound to you?
Yeah, it sounds, I mean, we'll probably just get cremated, but can't hurt to make sure we have a few extra bucks there.
Great. No big funeral plans then yet?
Oh, well, I mean, just because you're getting cremated doesn't mean you can't have a nice ceremony. Just don't really want to be stuck in the ground somewhere after I pass.
I'm the same way. From ashes we were raised and dust we shall return, right? And then, so a lot of people also want to have an emergency fund set aside in the event of one's passing. Big reason for that. It's hard to go back to work and you want to go through a good mourning period where you can just kind of adjust to all the changes in life. Typically what we see is $25,000 will get you through that for about 3 months. How does that number sound to you?
Let's bump that down a little bit. I think closer to maybe like another 10 would be good.
Another 10? Perfect. And then, so 2 kids, where are you hoping for them to go to school?
Ooh, well, I really haven't put too much thought towards that yet, other than just starting to save for their school.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that saving. What have y'all done currently?
Yeah, so we have a couple 529 set up for both the kids.
And how old are they again?
So one is 7. Mm-hmm. So actually, yeah, she was born about a year after we got married. Mm-hmm. And then the other is 4.
4. Great. Has anyone, without trying to scare you, has anyone talked to you about what college is going to cost in the future?
Well, we've done some of the numbers on our own and not too excited about that figure coming through, which is why we got those 529 set up as early as possible.
Yeah, so what I would recommend is we probably need to have about $100,000 for your 2 girls set aside in the case of one of you passing, if that is important to you.
Yes, I definitely want to make sure that they can get through college at least with minimal debt. So,
I mean, that was one of the greatest gifts that I was ever given, was being able to come out of college debt free. So, I think that's the right thing to do. So we'll put down 100,000 for now. And then mortgage. Are you guys currently paying a mortgage on your place?
Yes.
How much about is left on that?
Somewhere around maybe 120,000.
120. Is that something that you would like to have free and clear in the event that one of you passes?
So how does that? Short answer, yes. But since we calculated that into our expenses now, which would be better to use for that, like the mortgage number or for like the expenses we pay?
So it's a preference. It's different for every person I meet with. Some people are like, nah, the mortgage is there. We have funds to pay for it. It's not a big deal. Whereas other people are like, you know what, if I just want that gone for my spouse so she doesn't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Or he.
Yeah, I think it'll be good covered in that income number that we had before, because as long as she can still pay the mortgage.
Okay, Perfect.
So that way I can make sure that she actually has to stay in the house and not just collect a check and downsize.
That's funny. And then aside from that, what other debt do y'all have out there that you would want to have free and clear in the event of passing?
So I have about, we'll call it maybe 10,000 in student loans left.
Okay.
And she had a little bit more, about 15 or 20.
Is that something both of y'all would want to be?
I don't want to pay for her student loans if something happens to her, so.
Okay. So we'll make sure to mark that down.
And they're both floating rates, so who knows what that's going to look like over the next few years.
Exactly. And then, so I know that you mentioned that you have 2 little girls, right?
Yes.
So one thing that I'd like to talk to people, especially with girls, is would you want to make sure their wedding is paid for in the event of your passing?
Well, that would depend on the guy they're marrying. But, yeah, I think so. You know, I'm a little bit more traditional, so you know, I'd like to make sure that I can pay for my daughter's wedding rather than them having, you know, monetary issues trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So here in Dallas, what we see is typical wedding is about 20 grand. I know that seems like a lot, but yeah, that's about what we see. How does that number sound to you?
I guess, I mean, y'all are probably more expert on it than I am, so maybe
bump that down to 15, you think?
Let's bump that down a little bit because, you know, I'm sure that mom will be able to, or that, you know, myself, one of us will be able to help throw a little bit more money into there if needed. We don't want them getting carried away with this wedding and inviting every person they've ever known.
I completely agree, yeah. And then tell me, where do you work again?
I work just up the road at the Toyota plant.
Okay, how long have you worked there for?
Gosh, that's what originally brought me to Dallas, and my wife is from here, so let's see, I guess it's been probably about 10 years or so.
Oh wow, that's great. Yeah, Toyota's a phenomenal company to work for, and I know that they give y'all, as part of your benefits package, life insurance policies.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to pay into that policy currently?
So we have the option to, but I've never paid into that.
And
I've always just taken the free insurance.
Yeah, and then do you, so what is the free insurance? Is that like 2 times salary, I think?
I think it's 3 times.
3 times salary?
Because it's just over 300, I know, so it's somewhere around there.
Okay.
1,000 that I get.
Okay. So one thing, some people like to account for that life insurance in this analysis, kind of taking away as like, okay, we already have this life insurance in place. The only caveat to that is, do you know if that policy is portable?
I'm assuming if I don't have to pay for it, that it probably isn't. I doubt they would give me something for free and let me take it with me.
Yeah, so what we see a lot of the time is, or what we like to recommend to people is those policies, we kind of just have that as a caveat or as a little bit of caviar on top. Reason for it, we don't know if we're going to be working there, we don't know if we're not. Where do you stand on that?
I think we're okay to assume that it'll be there because, you know, realistically, I've been there 10 years. I don't see myself leaving, and you know, I'm sure that some of the things that are getting built in are only really near-term needs, you know, like mortgage and stuff like that. So
definitely,
I'm not worried about losing that $300,000 way down the road.
I think that's smart, definitely. And then, does your wife have a similar kind of benefit through her job?
So she actually gets some through my company. So
she does?
Spousal benefit, yep.
Okay, about how much is that?
Hers, so we applied for the max, which I think is about 50% of what I get.
Okay.
She's able to get, so it's about 150, call it.
150,000?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what we'll account for. And then aside from those policies, do you have any other assets out there currently that would help pay for, say, the funeral expenses or help kind of fund some of that income need?
nothing that I'd want to count towards it. I mean, I guess she could always cash out my retirement if she needed to, right?
Mhm.
Y'all usually account for that.
We'd like not to. Reason being is because typically speaking, with the plan that we're putting in place for you, she'd have to pay penalty taxes on that money. And we would rather that just be set aside for retirement.
Okay.
There's always a recommendation.
Okay. I mean, we have our savings. So, again, I don't know if that's something that y'all tie in or.
We can if you want to. Typically what we see people consider these liquid assets, is what we call them, is you have a big brokerage account, or you've got some sort of trust that can help fund some of these expenses, if that helps you with the clarity of it.
Gotcha. No, I don't think we have anything like that then.
Okay.
Yeah.
No worries, and most people don't. It's kind of a rarity when I see people do. So let me just finalize these numbers here for you. Okay, great. So after all these questions, we come to a number. So the number for you is about $1 million in coverage that we need. And for your wife is about $180,000.
Okay.
How do those numbers sound?
I guess it makes sense. Just, it seems like a lot.
Do you not think you're worth that much?
Well, I would argue that my wife might be worth more than that than I am, but I guess my wife's definitely seems pretty reasonable. That's kind of what I was expecting, and I guess looking at the income need, I wouldn't want to see her having any issues with that. So, and now is that number total, or is that after just the insurance need outside of work that I need?
No, so that's the total, accounting for the insurance that you currently have through work.
Okay, so I still on top of that need another $1 million.
So in total, about 1.3 million
Okay.
is what you're going to need. But since you have about that 330,000 through work, that takes that down to about $1 million.
Okay,
Still
I
that we
gotcha.
need.
Okay. No, that sounds about right. I guess my only concern is, how much that amount of insurance would cost.
And
I would love to have it, but if I can't afford it, it doesn't do me too good.
So that's my job, is to make sure that it fits in your budget. So kind of continuing on with the conversation, about how much do you think you guys could spend on a monthly basis per person on insurance? What's your budget looking like?
Let's see. Per person, so I don't know about per person, but total, I mean, we accidentally probably say, or maybe about 1,000 or so a month goes towards our savings.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say that I would want to use all 1,000 of that, but
Let's say like 500.
Maybe like half that, like 500 a month we could afford to look into.
Let's start there.
Okay.
I think that's a good number to start at. Gives us some flexibility. So catch me up. What do you know about the 5 types of life insurance, Brian?
I thought there were, anyone we've talked to has just always said there was term and whole life. Is that not the case anymore?
They're not entirely wrong. So, overarching concept with life insurance, there's 2 different main types of policies you can get. The first one that you mentioned, term, where it's like renting a lease on a home. You have it for a set period of time. You pay the set premium, and you have that benefit for the defined period.
Okay.
The other is whole life, as you mentioned, or permanent life insurance is what I like to call it. And the idea of it, the name is, we're pretty good in the insurance industry and coming up with clever names. It lasts your whole life. And then there's 2 different ways that policies can be paid for. There's bundled policies and unbundled. And the big difference between the 2, bundled policies, you have to pay the premium on the date every single year. Unbundled, the premium payments are flexible. And I'll go over that in a little bit more detail here in a minute. But does that make sense so far?
So bundled, you have to pay the premiums or you lose the policy.
Exactly.
Unbundled, you don't always have to pay the premium?
No, and I'll explain that in more detail, but it's
Okay.
flexible. It's not that you don't have to pay it, it's a flexible premium structure.
Okay.
So,
that makes sense.
Yeah, so looking at this here, so this is the term policy that you mentioned. You get a fixed death benefit, level premium, and it's just pure protection. This is the cheapest type of insurance you can buy. The reason is insurance companies only pay out on them 2% of the time. It's very unlikely for an event to happen while you're being covered by this type of policy. So they're great for people that are younger, that know, kind of similar to yourself right now, we need a lot of protection, but we don't want to pay a lot of costs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great. So, and then here's the second one. Traditional whole life insurance, the one that you're familiar with. This is your grandfather probably had a policy and grandmother had a policy like this one. So the big things with this is we have the fixed premium, so you got to pay that premium every single month. That cash value, and then you get a level death benefit. The difference between term and permanent is this cash value right here. So you can think of that as getting equity in your home. You're buying your life insurance slowly over time so that you own it outright. Does that make sense so far?
Okay, yeah.
Great. So these two right here are the bundled policies, where you have to make the premium payments or the policy goes away.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what people realized back in probably the 1960s was we like this idea of whole life insurance. We like this idea of building a cash value inside of these policies. How can we make this cash value grow differently? And that's what you'll see the trend is through the last three types of insurance policies. So people knew they wanted two different things. They wanted a different way to grow their cash value, and they wanted flexibility in the way that they paid for the policy. Because we all know life happens. Sometimes the transistor in the car wants to go out, or the transmission, I should say, and you got to pay for that. And there's not necessarily leftover money to pay for some of these things. So what they did was you have a flexible premium structure in this universal life policy. The way the cash value grew, back in the 1970s when these policies first started coming out, interest rates, I don't know if you are familiar with them or not, but people were paying about 13% interest rates on their mortgage.
Wow.
Crazy. I don't know how
I
people
wouldn't
did
own
it.
a home right now if that were the case.
No, I don't know how my grandparents did it. But what was great about them for these types of policies, the way that the cash value grows is based on interest rates. So it was really great up until probably the late 80s. And then so as interest rates started to fall, once again, the insurance industry came in and was like, hey, how can we make this cash value grow better? We want this to grow for us. So the next thing they came up with was indexed universal life. Big difference here. Once again, you get the flexible premium structure. The way the cash value grows here is based off of indices. So think of the Dow Jones or the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ.
Okay.
The way they do it is they track those indices, and that's the way the cash value grows. The unique thing about this policy, these types of policies, there's a cap and a floor on how that cash value grows. So you're never going to lose money in a year in your account value, but to give you that benefit, they cap how much it can grow in a year. So typically cap rates are around 6-7%. So if market goes down, you don't lose anything. Market goes up 10%, you only receive about 6% growth in the cash value.
Gotcha.
So we see these two types of policies used on more conservative individuals where I want some growth, but you know what, I don't want to take on too much market risk. And then the newest policy that we've come out with, and this is the Swiss Army knife of financial planning, is the variable universal life. The way this grows, think of your 401k. We invest it in about 180 different money managers, some of the top ones, Goldman Sachs, Fidelity, Oppenheimer, you know the names.
Yeah.
And the way this cash value grows is purely based on stocks and bonds and how that underlying portfolio does over the time that you have this policy.
Okay.
Last thing that I want to mention, so here's the cheapest policy, or the least expensive, then going down from here, it gets So this is the most expensive type of policy. This is the least. Reason being, you're paying for guarantees within the policy. What questions do you have over this so far?
So what would you recommend between because these two seem similar, right? The index and the variable.
Mm-hmm.
What would you recommend is a better fit for somebody to go with? To the portfolio or the index route?
Well, let me ask you this. Are you a very risky person?
I mean, I guess so. I don't like losing money, but
Yeah.
I understand how the market works, and sometimes that's natural and will happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the end of the world. We still have plenty of time till we're trying to retire. So.
Mm-hmm. I think based on what you're saying, index would probably be better for you. So, I mean, that being said, which policies resonate the most with you? I know you mentioned, so it seems like these two kind of caught your eye. Is there any others?
Well, and obviously the term, because you mentioned that'll be, less
Yeah.
expensive, to make sure that that's really the, if something terrible happens in the next few years. But I also do want to leave something behind, so probably one of these two here.
Okay.
In addition to that term.
Yeah, and you know what? I think the index is going to be best for you at this point because we just want to make sure that, because the purpose of this is protection, this policy, and that's typically what I put people in. Whereas if people want to use it more as an investment, that's when we use the variable universal life policy.
Okay.
Any questions?
Nope.
Great. And then I know we talked about this earlier. You guys think you have about $500 a month that you could allot towards these types of policies?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Great. Pause. Coming back together.
Gotcha.
So Brian, last time what we did was we secured what the right number of insurance was for you, and we looked at these different types of all 5 different types of life insurance policies and determined that the indexed universal life was the most appropriate for you. Could you catch me up? I want to make sure that you understand this properly. Explain how the indexed universal policy works to me as if I was a 5th grader.
Okay, so, did you know anything about investments when you were a 5th grader? So, from my understanding, it was where it has the opportunity where you can pay more, pay less for your premiums each month.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cash inside of it, so you still have the total benefit amount that you could choose to either, again, be flexible or stay the same. But then the cash inside of it grows based on how a certain market is doing, right?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's exactly how it works. So first thing I'll mention, so the way that insurance works and the costs of them, it can be pretty complicated, but to break it down for you, AXA, so the company, so the life insurance companies, they determine for that $1 million of coverage that you need, what's the absolute minimum that you can pay into it. So this is the minimum amount to get this amount of coverage. Make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Now, back in the 1980s, what people did was they took out these life insurance policies, and the way that life insurance works, all the money inside of it, even the growth, gets pulled out tax-free. So it was a tax haven for a lot of people. Politicians started to realize, especially in the IRS, hey, we're never going to get any of this money. So what they did was they took out these tiny life insurance policies on themselves, where they're putting, so say $10,000 in coverage, putting $1 million a year into them just so that they can get the tax benefit, and then they close the loophole, so no one else can do that. So what the IRS does, exactly, right? Gotta love politicians. So what the IRS does today is they set an absolute maximum that you can put into the policy.
Okay.
We are going to be right here because we're looking for protection purposes in this case. Now, if we were wanting to use this kind of tool as an investment, we'd be closer to here. But today, we're going to be down here trying to pay trying to pay the minimum just to make sure that we have the coverage that we need.
Okay.
Does that sound right to you?
Yes. And I definitely want to talk about the idea of the investment later, but
Yeah,
that's not
definitely.
for now.
And that's the beauty of these policies. They're flexible, so we can make it work. But so overarching theme of how these policies work. So you've got your money, got your premiums. This money, when you pay them, goes into a couple of different places. And what those places are is we just invest it, like we were talking about, in some sort of indices, like the S&P 500. We can do it internationally. We can do large cap, small cap, and we can do growth opportunities as well, or like gold, silver.
Okay.
Now, so the money that you pay goes into this. Every single month, there's that cost of insurance that we were talking about. So they just all go. The cost of insurance comes out of that account value. So if we build up this cash value enough, we actually can stop paying premiums on it. And if it does well enough in the account, and that's the beauty of the flexibility in these types of policies. So as you pay into this type of policy, this bucket starts to fill up. And you can think of this bucket as your cash value.
Okay.
And there's a little spigot right here. So as it gets bigger and bigger, the cash value, what we can do is we can actually pull money out of here when the well is good. The big benefits to that, as I was mentioning earlier, it's all tax-free, that money. Second big one, you don't have to wait until you're 59 and a half to touch it. So it's a great tool for people, especially that want to look at retiring in their 40s and 50s. The cons to this, there is somewhat of a surrender schedule on it where we just can't access all of the money. That being said, we can access the money after the first year that we start paying into this. Other con, we have to get underwritten. So we have to make sure that you're in good enough health to be insurable. What questions do you have?
Let's see. So is there typically a year where I do have full access to it, or will I never have full access to it?
You will.
You mentioned the surrender.
Yeah, it takes 15 years is the way these policies work. I mean, it's a permanent life insurance policy, so this is going to be with you the rest of your life. This is just the way that the insurance companies make sure that people keep paying into them.
Okay.
What other questions have you got?
I think that's it. That makes sense so far.
Great. Well, here's an illustration. Done. That took way longer than I was hoping.
Oh man, it's 110. I can move.
Yeah.
Good job though.
Thank you.
Pause. Stop.
Pause.